The morning they buried my husband, he was standing in the parking lot of the church. I know how that sounds. I need you to stay with me. Marcus had been missing for 11 days. 11 days in which his family, his mother, Loretta, his brother, Curtis, his Aunt Diane, and her 3 daughters, had decided, collectively, and without consulting me, that he was dead, that something had happened to him, that the man they knew would never simply disappear, and therefore the only explanation was the worst one. They had planned the funeral without telling me until 3 days before. Loretta called me on a Tuesday and said the service was Friday, and that she hoped I would be there. Not that she was inviting me, that she hoped I would be there. I am going to tell you what happened on that Friday morning, and I am going to tell you what the 11 days before it looked like from where I was standing, because those 11 days are where the real story lives. My name is Deja Renee Washington. Well, Deja Renee Collins for 7 years, and then Deja Renee Washington again for the 2 years since, which I will explain. I'm 38 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I want to tell you about the man I married, and the family he came from, and the 11 days that finally made everything clear. Marcus Collins was the kind of man who filled a room. Not loudly, he was actually a quiet person, measured and careful with his words in a way that made you feel like whatever he said to you had been chosen specifically for you. He was the middle child of 3, raised in Macon by a mother who had decided early that her children were extensions of herself, and who had spent the following decades enforcing that decision with a consistency that I can only describe as impressive. Loretta Collins loved her children the way some people love things they own, completely, without distance, without the understanding that love is not the same as possession, and possession is not the same as care. I met Marcus at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Atlanta in the fall of 2014. He was 31, I was 31. We talked for 4 hours at that dinner, and he called me the next morning, and we were together from that point forward with the kind of ease that you don't question because questioning it might break it. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, close friends and family. I wore my grandmother's pearls. Marcus cried at the altar, which surprised everyone who thought they knew him, and surprised no one who actually did. The marriage was good. I want to say that clearly because this story is complicated enough without ambiguity about the foundation. We were good together, genuinely, in the daily way that matters more than any other way. We made each other laugh, we disagreed without cruelty, we built a life in a house in Decatur with a backyard garden I tended and a workshop Marcus kept in the garage where he built things with his hands on weekends. The difficulty was always Loretta. Loretta had opinions about our house, our neighborhood, our finances, our plans for children, the way I cooked, the way I kept the house, the holidays we spent with my family versus hers. She expressed these opinions consistently and without invitation, and with the specific confidence of a woman who had never been told, by anyone she respected, that her opinions were not required. Somber. Marcus managed it the way he managed everything with his mother, with patience and with a particular kind of exhausted love that had been conditioned into him over 30 years. He did not agree with everything she said, but he also did not stop her. He found the middle ground and lived there, and asked me, without ever quite asking, to live there with him. I want to tell you what 7 years of that middle ground felt like, because I think when people hear a story like this, they imagine a dramatic marriage, shouting, ultimatums, obvious dysfunction, and that is not what it was. It was quieter than that, more gradual. It was the Thanksgiving when Loretta rearranged my kitchen while I was at the store, because she said she knew a better system, and Marcus came home and said she was just trying to help. It was the Christmas when she told Marcus, in front of me, that she wished he had married someone from Macon because at least she would know the family. It was the birthday dinner she organized for Marcus without telling me, and when I arrived and found 30 people at a restaurant I hadn't known about, she said she had assumed I was too busy with work to plan anything myself. Each one of these things, individually, could be explained, could be softened, could be placed in the category of difficult mother-in-law behavior that millions of women navigate every year. But they were not individual, they were consistent, they were a message being delivered, slowly and without pause, over 7 years. The message was, you are a guest, here, in his life, in this family, in whatever space I have decided to allow. You are here because he chose you, but I have not chosen you, and I never will, and as long as that is true, you will always be slightly less than what you believe yourself to be. I tried. For 7 years I tried. I smiled and redirected and found things to appreciate about Loretta Collins and looked for the woman underneath the control who genuinely loved her son. She was there. I saw her sometimes, in the way she looked at Marcus when he wasn't looking back, in the way she kept every photograph he had ever been in arranged on the wall of her living room. But love and behavior are different things, and her behavior had been making our marriage smaller for years. The fight that changed everything happened on a Sunday afternoon in March, 7 years into our marriage. It was not the worst fight Marcus and I had ever had. It was not the loudest or the most dramatic. It was the quietest, which is why it was the last one. We had been talking, calmly, at the kitchen table, about boundaries, about Loretta, about the fact that she had called Marcus 4 times during our anniversary dinner the previous week, and he had answered twice. I said that I needed him to make a choice about what our marriage looked like and who its primary members were. He said he couldn't choose between his mother and his wife. I said, I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I'm asking you to stop letting her run our life. He said, You've never understood what she means to me. I said, No, I've never understood why what she means to you is more important than what I mean to you. We sat in that silence for a long time, and then Marcus stood up and said he needed some air, and he went out the back door, and I heard his truck start, and I assumed he was going to drive around the block the way he did sometimes when he needed to think. He did not come back that evening. He did not come back the next morning. By the 3rd day, I had called everyone I could think of. His brother Curtis said he hadn't heard from him. His friend Deshawn said the same. His office said he had not come in and not called. I called Loretta on the 3rd day. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting for my call. She said she hadn't heard from him either. Her voice was careful in the way that voices are careful when they are concealing something they have decided you don't deserve to know. I filed a missing persons report on day 4. The police were thorough and kind and told me what they always tell people in this situation, that most adults who go missing have chosen to do so, and that the absence of evidence of harm was, in a specific way, good news. I did not find this comforting. On day 6, Loretta called me. Her voice had changed. It had the quality of a woman who had been given permission to feel something she had been suppressing. She said the family had been talking. She said they believed something had happened to Marcus. She said they were going to hold a memorial service. I said, a memorial service. She said, a celebration of his life, in case. I said, Loretta, he has been missing for 6 days. The police are still looking. We don't know what happened. She said, we know Marcus. He would never just leave. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that she didn't know Marcus as well as she believed, which was that the man I had been married to for 7 years had in fact left, had gotten in his truck on a Sunday evening and driven away and not come back, and that whatever the reason for that, it was real and it had happened. I did not go to the planning meetings. I was not invited to the planning meetings. The flowers were chosen by Loretta and her daughters. The music was chosen by Curtis. The program was designed by Loretta's church secretary. My name appeared in it as Marcus's wife, present tense, because technically I still was, but I had no role in any of it. Curtis called me on day 8 to tell me the service details. He was uncomfortable. I could hear it in the careful way he spoke, the pauses where he was choosing words. He said the family wanted me to have a seat in the front row. He said Loretta had specifically said that. I said, "Curtis, your brother has been missing for 8 days. The police are still looking. You understand that holding a funeral service is premature." He said, "Loretta needs this, Deja." I said, "I understand that." He said, "You'll come?" I said I would think about it, and I sat with the phone in my hand after he hung up, and I thought about what it meant that a family could love someone so much that they would bury him before he was gone. What it meant that their grief was so large it could not wait for confirmation. What it meant that I had spent 7 years inside that family and still felt, sitting alone in my kitchen on day 8, completely outside of it. I want to tell you what those 11 days felt like, because I think people imagine that when your husband disappears, you spend your time crying and waiting and being afraid. And I did all of those things, but I also spent those 11 days doing something else. I was thinking, clearly, in a way I had not thought in years, about the marriage and what it had been and what it had cost me, about the Sunday evening at the kitchen table and what Marcus had said, that he couldn't choose, about the 7 years I had spent trying to make space for a woman who had never made space for me in return. And I was doing things. I called my own attorney on day 5, not because I had decided anything, I hadn't, but because I needed to understand what my situation was, what the house situation was, what the financial situation was, what my rights were as the spouse of a man who had disappeared without explanation. My attorney, a woman named Priscilla Monroe, who had been practicing family law for 19 years, sat across from me on a Wednesday afternoon and asked me questions I had never been asked before, about our finances, our assets, our accounts, about what was joint and what was individual, about what I knew and what I didn't know. What I knew was more than I had realized. What I didn't know was less than I had feared. The house was jointly owned. The primary accounts were joint. Marcus had a separate account I hadn't known the full details of. I knew it existed. We had discussed it once. He had described it as a personal savings account he had kept from before the marriage. Priscilla said we could look into it if we needed to. I said, let's know what we're dealing with, just in case. On day 9, Marcus called me. I was in the kitchen making coffee at 7 in the morning when my phone rang with his number. I stood there and looked at it for 3 rings before I answered. He said, "Deja." I said, "Where are you?" He said he was safe. He said he was sorry. He said he had needed time to think and he had driven to his college roommate's cabin in the mountains. And he had been there and he hadn't brought his phone charger, and by the time he found one, he didn't know how to start the conversation. I said, "Your mother is planning your funeral." He said, "What?" I said, "The service is Friday. You should probably call her." What happened next is something I have thought about many times. Marcus drove back to Atlanta on day 10. He called his mother. He called his brother. He called the church where the service was going to be held and told them it was being canceled. Loretta did not cancel it.
I found out on Thursday evening, the night before, from Curtis, who called me sounding uncomfortable in the way people sound when they are delivering information they know is wrong, but are delivering anyway. He said Loretta had decided the service should go forward. He said she felt the family needed closure. He said Marcus had tried to talk to her and she had said that the planning was already done and the guests had already been notified, and that it would be disrespectful to cancel at this point. I sat with that for a long moment. Marcus was alive. His mother knew he was alive. She was holding his funeral anyway. I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. He sounded tired in a way that was not about sleep. I said, "Are you going to stop it?" He said, "I've tried. She won't listen." I said, "Marcus, are you going to go to your own funeral?" He said, "I don't know what to do, Deja." I said, "I know."
I went to the church on Friday morning. Not because I wanted to, not because I thought it was right, but because I had spent 7 years watching Marcus not know what to do about his mother, and I needed to see, one final time, what he would do when the situation was completely impossible to avoid. The church was full. Loretta had invited everyone: church members, family friends, neighbors, people who had known Marcus since childhood. The flowers were white lilies. The program had his photograph on the cover, a good one from a few years ago, him laughing at something outside the frame. I sat in the third row, not the front. That had been reserved for immediate family, and Loretta had decided, apparently, that I did not qualify. I sat in the third row in a black dress, and I waited. The pastor opened the service. He spoke about Marcus, about his character, his kindness, the mark he left on the people who loved him. People nodded, a few people cried. Loretta sat in the front row with her head bowed. And then the side door of the church opened. I heard the murmur before I saw him, a sound moving through the congregation like a wave, surprise, confusion, and then something louder than both of those things. I turned, like everyone else turned. Marcus was standing in the doorway in a gray shirt and dark pants, not dressed for a funeral, looking at the room full of people who had gathered to mourn him. The pastor stopped speaking. The room went completely silent. Lorena turned around in the front row, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do in 7 years. It collapsed, not with relief, with something more complicated than relief, with the expression of a woman who has just understood something about herself that she did not want to understand. Marcus walked down the aisle. He did not look at anyone except her. He stood at the front of the church and he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of that room, "Mama, I'm alive, and we need to talk." I will not give you every detail of what happened after that. Some of it is still private, and some of it is still unresolved, and some of it belongs to Marcus in ways that are not mine to tell. What I will tell you is this. Marcus and I separated 3 months after that Friday, not because of what happened in the church. That was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was the Sunday evening at the kitchen table when he had said he couldn't choose. I had heard him then. It took me 3 more months to fully understand what I had heard. The divorce was quiet. Priscilla handled everything. The house was sold. The assets were divided fairly. Marcus and I spoke to each other with the specific courtesy of 2 people who had loved each other and were trying to honor that even in the ending of it. I have thought about Loretta many times since, about the woman who loved her son so completely that she could not see where her love ended and her need began. About the funeral she held for a living man because she needed the grief to be acknowledged, even when there was nothing to grieve. She was not a villain. I want to be clear about that. She was a woman who had built her identity around her children and had never been asked to examine what that cost them. That is not the same as being a villain. It is its own kind of tragedy. But it was not my tragedy to carry anymore. Marcus remarried 2 years after our divorce. I heard through a mutual friend. I felt nothing dramatic when I heard. No jealousy, no sadness, just the particular neutrality of learning something about a chapter that has already closed. I hope he is happy. I mean that genuinely, without complexity. I hope whoever she is someone his mother can accept. I hope he has found a way to give her what he could not quite give me. I have been on my own for 2 years now. I have a smaller apartment, just mine, decorated exactly as I want it, with no opinions from anyone about the spice cabinet or the coffee maker or whether the living room furniture faces the right direction. I kept my grandmother's pearls. I have a garden in the backyard that I tend every spring. I have Priscilla's number still saved in my phone, which I hope never to need again, but feel better for having. I want to say something to anyone listening who recognizes something in this story. Not necessarily the specific details, not the missing husband or the canceled funeral or the church full of people who didn't know what they were witnessing, but the feeling underneath all of it. The feeling of loving someone who cannot fully choose you, who loves you genuinely and completely, and still, when the moment comes, cannot put you first. That feeling is real, and it is one of the loneliest things there is, because you are not being chosen over nothing, you are being chosen against by someone who loves you in favor of something they cannot let go of. You are allowed to maim that, you are allowed to grieve it, and you are allowed, when you have grieved it long enough, to put it down. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Zuri Chronicles, because every day we come back here and tell another story, another truth, another woman who finally put down what was never hers to carry. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.